The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find. The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style.
Hello and welcome to the Big H Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hayes, and today I have Mr. Tom Berger, funeral director of Berger Funeral Home. Tom, it's great to have you along with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So many things to get into on this podcast. We have all the time in the world. Let's start in a little bit about your family history and your background and your roots in Hilton.
Well, my roots go way back on both sides in my father's family and indirectly in my mother's family up more in Brockport. But my grandmother Berger was a Wright, and that's a big family here in the area, still descendants, myself included. And way back in about 1811 to 1813, Mrs. Elizabeth Wright came here with 4 sons and several daughters, and they all settled down around the Dunbar, what's now the Dunbar Town Line Road. And actually there's a little cemetery there where the early Wrights are buried. It's a little unique there. Mr. Wright didn't come. His name, he's long gone, so I'm not going to do him any harm. His name was Gad Wright, and he actually had 2 families going at the same time. They started in Massachusetts, came to Connecticut, then came to Oneida County, New York, where, as I said, he was having children by Elizabeth and by Rhoda North. And he did not come here. He visited here, but he didn't come here to live. But the 4 sons were Gad Jr., Barbara, Nathan, and Jesse. And they all did come here, and a couple of the daughters married and stayed in the area. On my father's side, the Berger name was actually changed from Vanderbogert to Berger. Vanderbogert, as you probably, those of you that understand where names originated, that was a Dutch name. They came in, the first Vanderbogert came into New Amsterdam, which is, of course, now New York City, around 1625. And that family moved up the Hudson River to different communities, and they ended up in the border of Saratoga and Warren County, and they were there a generation until John moved to the town of Greece, then about the same time frame, around 1815, and the name was changed from Vanderbogert to Berger. Why? I do not know. My grandfather, who of course this John was his grandfather, he didn't know. Did John get in some trouble down in another part of the state? I don't know, or I just think he wanted to change the name to something shorter. Most of the people on both sides were involved in agriculture. My grandfather Berger, who was a descendant, of course, of the ones I'm talking about, he and my great-grandfather had a farm. It was actually in the town of Greece, but it was just across the Parma border on Hogan Point Road, which is a dead-end road, actually. But they had a farm there, and that was taken up. Half of the farm was taken by the eminent domain by New York State to build the Lake Ontario State Parkway, They took 85 acres of the farm and paid my great grandfather and grandfather $6,000. They protested it and went to the Court of Appeals and got 12. But of course, the lawyers had to get half of that. So my mother's parents were in Brockport, where all of the elementary schools are in Brockport, was my grandfather's farm. And the school district would buy 10-acre sections. And I remember they'd give Grandpa like $10,000. But oh, my Lord, that Ralph Ellis, he was the richest guy in town because he got 10,000 for a few acres. Actually, the remnants of that farm, if you go out of Brockport, there's an old, it's old, a stone house that's been a bank. It was a church for a while. That was my grandparents' home. On the other side of that Ellis family, my mother's maiden name was Ellis, were the Hartshorns, and they were up on the hill where Wegmans is. There were two brothers, Ralph Ellis and Fred Ellis, and when their parents died, one got the lower farm, Grandpa, and Fred got the upper farm. So every time I go to Taco Bell or into ES&L up there, I think this is ancestral acres.
Mm-hmm.
So now my wife, she was a native of Hamlin. We went all the way through school together from kindergarten on up. Actually, let's start with the kindergarten story. We started school in 1951, which is the last year that all 12 classes were in what's now we call the Henry Street School. All 12, 1 through 12. So there wasn't room for the kindergarten kids. So we went half-day session to kindergarten in the Oddfellows Hall, which is now a private residence. The Oddfellows is a fraternal organization that was their little headquarters on Railroad Avenue. But as I said, fraternal organizations, like a lot of other organizations, are in trouble of keeping members, and they joined with the lodge in Brockport, which is nothing to do with me, actually. But that's where we started kindergarten, and we went all the way through school. We graduated in 1964. I went to Cornell University as a pre-veterinary medicine student. I'd always wanted to be a veterinarian. Don't ask me of all the animals that I had around. At one time, I had 300 rabbits. Now, we know how rabbits are noted for their reproductive skills, but mine were really real controlled, and I had separate cages, kept very good records, and I was selling most of them, and I feel bad about it. Here I had such a strong feeling for animals, but a lot of them I sold to Strong Memorial Hospital, where they were used for research. I'm not proud of that fact, but that was a time in our history. So I was in pre-veterinary medicine, very, very strenuous course, very, very. And I came to the realization when I was a senior and wanted to apply to the veterinary college, which was a part of Cornell. I did not have a 4.0 average, and they were turning away applicants that had a 4.0 average. Pardon me. So I continued to major in biological science and got my BS degree from Cornell in 1968. My wife at this time, she had, upon the suggestion of the guidance counselors at Hilton Central School, suggested that she maybe like to go to a junior college, and she went to Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts for 2 years, and then she transferred for her teaching education to Lesley College, which was in Cambridge, Mass., which is just across the Charles River from Boston. And she came and began teaching in Brockport and taught there until she retired in 1997. We have two daughters, Lori and Christy. Lori is a reading specialist at Spenceport Central School. And I can't believe it, but in 3 years, she'll be old enough to retire. My younger daughter, Christy, is the office manager of the funeral home. I have 5 grandchildren, 3 of which are out of high school and out of college. And then the youngest 2 are twins that are in 8th grade at Merton Williams School. My wife and I, after retirement, bought a condo down in Florida, which now that I'm semi plus retired, we do spend our winter months down in Jensen Beach, Florida.
As you were growing up, did you have any influential people in grade school, high school, college that gave you some inspiration to do what you do?
That came a little later.
Okay.
But some folks that will listen to this might remember Blanche March. She was a social study teacher. She taught 7th and 8th grade social studies. And 7th grade, at that point, concentrated, even the textbook was exploring New York State. For the whole year, you learned of the history of our state, of New York State. And then 8th grade was more American history. But it was Blanche March that instilled my interest, my side interest in history. She was an excellent teacher. Those of you that might have some recollection of her can remember she was very strict. She probably wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes today, but she didn't beat you over the head. But you knew that she was boss in the classroom. She probably had of all my teachers, had the most influence, other than my 4th grade teacher, Miss Ball, Barbara Ball. This would have been about 1954, when there was more of a transition in the district expanding, and they didn't have enough room. So in 4th grade, unfortunately, we once again had half-day sessions. She was just a remarkable teacher that I still remember. Actually, she after her retirement, she went to California, and she was still on my mind, but not that often. And all of a sudden, I got a letter from her stating her current situation. And when she passed away, would pass away, she wanted me to handle her arrangements and get her back home from California. So she remembered that, and I felt privileged to be able to help out and from that aspect. I never had, well, I only had one teacher that I regret that I had, and of course I wouldn't name that teacher. But really, going through all 12 grades at Hilton, didn't have very many academic bad experiences. Yeah, I do need to go back though to kindergarten in that Odd Fellows Hall. There were about 60 to 75 of us, I guess, and it was double sessions. There were actually 4 sessions. You went half days there. There might have been more kids, but there were 2 teachers, a Mrs. Brule, Mary Brule, and then a Mrs. Seeger, who they both handled and taught all the kids, but we were specified to be attached to one or the other. And, that was a good experience. I do remember, I wouldn't pass codes today. That building had one bathroom in the basement. You went down these rickety stairs. paint was sort of peeling off the cement walls. I remember they were painted blue, and then you went in the restroom, which just had one toilet, and everybody used it, boys and girls, and of course, just you had to raise your hand if you had to use the bathroom. And of course, we would also, I don't know how many people remember that in kindergarten, you always had milk and graham crackers, and we would venture downstairs for a little break and have our milk and graham crackers. And then, of course, that was still the day when you had to bring your rug, and when the teacher needed to get a little reprieve, you'd take a nap on the rug. So, as I said, I had a very positive experience at Hilton Central School. Going back, my grandfather, Avery Berger, that I referred to earlier, he attended Hilton High School when it was the wooden structure that was between Henry Street and West Avenue, more or less where the gazebo is today. Now, that was dismantled, actually, not completely dismantled. Parts of it were moved to several locations within the Hilton Village. But Grandpa went there. He graduated in 1910. I still have, well, I've donated them to the Historical Society. I still have some of his textbooks. Now, mind you, he took courses like anatomy, um, zoology, botany, ancient history, unheard of today. Well, they're heard of, but I know. I mean, I've still got his textbooks from those three courses in particular. Then my father graduated from Hilton in 1938, Edward Berger, and then, as I think I referred to, he stayed on the farm with my grandfather Avery, and he and my mother went together for 6 years because there was the constant fear that my father was going to get drafted, and he never did because, as several other fellows in the area, if they were involved in agriculture, they were given a deferment. So after I started to tell you a little bit after my high school experience, I went to Cornell and I went through that with you. Then I was accepted in a program called the National Teachers Association. And I didn't say that right. It was the Teacher Corps, American Teacher Corps. And they would accept people that did not have any educational course background in their college training, and they wanted to have you wipe the slate clean. And I went to Buffalo State for the 2 years when I was teaching summers, and obtained my master's degree in education. I'm sorry to say I don't even know where I've got that right now, but they paid for your education, and you had to agree that you'd stay in the Buffalo City district for 5 years, which is what I did. But it was still gnawing away at me that I wanted to have a career change. And that career change is what I have been doing for the last 50 years as a funeral director. My inspiration there, I referred to Grandpa Avery Berger that, graduated from Hilton, had the farm. My family lived right next to my grandparents, and my grandfather was became ill with a form of cancer that I'm sure today would have been cured or at least put into remission. But he died when I was 14, and I was devastated. I was the only grandson living next door. Everywhere that Grandpa went, Tommy went. And you heard me say, Tommy went. So I really was affected by his death. I'd never been to a funeral before, never had that experience. And his funeral was at the Adams Funeral Home, which is at 225 West Avenue, across the road from the Quest School.
Hmm.
It's no longer a funeral home, um, but I was, number one, fascinated, and I'm just going to say it. Before Grandpa died at Brockport Hospital, he was emaciated beyond you could even imagine. He looked like somebody that had passed in the concentration camp. But when we walked into the funeral home, it was a traditional funeral. He was laid out in a casket, and I was just fascinated. Now I know the technical things that Mr. Adams did to make that viewing possible. And the way I would put it, he gave Grandpa back to us for a couple more days. So he was my earliest inspiration to become a funeral director. Can I give a little history of undertakers,
Absolutely, yeah.
funeral directors
Hmm.
in the Hilton area? There's a history of them. Uh, it used to be all funerals were held in the people's homes. There were no special places called a funeral home, and some of the earliest funeral directors at that time known as undertakers or morticians in Parma Center. There was an Edwin Twentyman, a representative of the Twentyman family, and then there was a Burritt funeral home. And I don't want to say funeral home, undertaker, where basically these places would have a supply of caskets. When the death occurred, usually at home, they went, got the body, brought it back to their facility, prepared the body, and that word would be embalmed the body, put it in a casket, took the casket back to the family home where the visitation would be, and it usually would be 2 days. And sometimes the funeral was held right there in the home, or other times, if the person had a uh, church affiliation, they'd take the casket to the church and have a funeral, and then to the cemetery. So some of the early funeral directors were Twentymans, Burritts, and then came along George Lee, who basically took over some of the work of the original Burritt Funeral Home. And they were beginning to have funerals in a specific building, and his was on, not where the dentist office is now, the Sassone dentist office, that was the Lee Funeral Home, then became the Lee and Tubb Funeral Home, and then in 1957, Mr. Carl Cant bought that facility. So it was George Lee, Charles Tubb, who, by the way, happened to be a high school classmate of my father's, and then Carl Cant. Then Fred Adams, who I referred to, that had my grandfather's funeral, he started his funeral home. And there again, more funerals were being held at a funeral facility, I think in 1934. And he uh, maintained that funeral home until there were some personal circumstances in his life that led him to close the funeral home. And after that, it was just Mr. Cant's funeral home at 303 Lake Avenue, which is now the Sassone Dental Clinic. My aspiration to become a funeral director was, as I said, when I was ended my teaching career, I had to go to Simmons School of Mortuary Science in Syracuse, New York, where I took it was a 12 month course. It was 4 quarters. You went all year. Um, I found that it was academically not real challenging because a lot of the technical things, other than the embalming techniques, but the human anatomy and chemistry I'd already had in college and high school. So upon completing Simmons School, then you are required to serve a year's apprenticeship, which I started at a funeral home in Syracuse and then completed at Miller Funeral Homes in Rochester, New York. And then in 1976, I bought 735 East Avenue, which was the Al and B. McMahon home. and was very fortunate that the current members of the Parma zoning board were very cooperative with me and did give me a use variance for that property, which I changed it from a residence to a funeral home. After that, in 1989, Mr. Cant decided to retire, and we were both having about half of the funerals in the town. So, but I was going to be getting all of the funerals. So then I put on a big addition in the back, which, believe it or not, cost me twice as much as the original property cost when I bought it in 1976. So I've been owner of the Thomas C. Berger Funeral Home since then, and during that duration, have served a little over 7,000 families. As I referred to, I'm semi-retired, retiring, and I've had the privilege of a gentleman that's worked for me for a great number of years that is going to be able to take over the funeral home and continue, hopefully, some of the things that were started by me in terms of being quite progressive in that the National Funeral Directors Association for many years had a program called Pursuit of Excellence, and you presented what your program, people would say program for a funeral home, but for all of the things that we did during the year, and they were judged by a panel. And there were a couple of years that we got the second place in the nation, and then eventually got the first place, which was a beautiful white marble eagle statue, which I do have displayed at the funeral home. What are some of the things that I did during that time frame that would qualify to even apply for this designation? Well, one of the things is for many years, the fourth graders here in Hilton would take, or no, the teachers would take the fourth grade class on a little bus tour around the town of Parma and would discuss some important things. Then they would end up at Parma Union Cemetery, where I would give a little discussion on what a cemetery is and the history of cemeteries in Parma, because as you drive around, there are several smaller cemeteries. I referred to the Wright Cemetery. There's Hoosick Hill up on the ridge, Castle Cemetery, on Peck Road, the Sage Knapp Cemetery on the Clarkson Palmertown Line Road. There's another cemetery that there's no stones left on East Avenue in Hilton. There's a little marker that I put there in the bicentennial era, just dedicating this ground as the early burial place of Hilton citizens. My grandmother recalled as a little girl, now she was born in 1892, she recalls going to another little child's funeral there at that cemetery when she was a little girl. She couldn't remember the name or anything like that. So they would the fourth graders would come to the cemetery. I'd talk to them about the different types of materials that went into the headstones. I'd take them around and show them some important people that are buried there. One of them was John Patterson, who was actually a New York State senator. And believe it or not, his obelisk monument is the biggest one in the cemetery. I have 6 generations of my family buried there. And there's a spot with a rock on with my name on it, marking where I'm going to go. But then I would help the children. Of course, I would only have them come if they had enough parent supervision. But I would show the children how to do headstone rubbings, and they would concentrate on that. And I'd have 30 kids come up to me and say, "Where's my grandpa buried?" And I'd say, "Well, who was your grandfather?" "Oh, he was John Curtis." I said, "Well, if you go down the middle driveway, about halfway, his grave should be right there, 2 rows in off the road. But I mean, a lot of the times they'd name people that I couldn't pinpoint where they were buried. Also during this time frame, and these were all things that I would put together for the um, uh, application for the Pursuit of Excellence Award. I was also teaching a death and dying course at through Hilton continuing education. I did that for about 7 or 8 years. It wasn't standing room only,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't do it unless there were 5 people that registered, and most of the time it was 5 to 8 people. Also, at the same time, I was not teaching the full course, but I was invited initially to go to a death and dying course at Monroe Community College. And when I started to keep track of going out there, because there were like 3 professors that taught death and dying, um, I got close to 500 times that I went to MCC. I was not reimbursed. That wasn't the reason I was doing it. I got a lot of dinner certificates from from the teachers, but I just I it was I enjoyed doing it, explaining what my profession was all about and answering questions because of all the things that are out there. If I ask, in fact, I used to start my lectures out um, at some of those classes. I'd say, if you were given 100 career choices, where would you put my career, funeral director? And they're all looking at each other. I said, then for just a little humor, I'd say, blessing my next Big Mac, I bet most of you put 99 or 100, and they'd all shake their head. But hopefully we would there'd be a better understanding of what the professional responsibilities of a funeral director are. And of course, I didn't have a specimen to explain the embalming procedure,
Hmm.
but I would bring some of the materials that are used for that procedure and explain how they were used in embalming a body. Then most of the people were most interested when I talk about cremation. There was so much misunderstanding. They almost thought that when people were cremated, somewhere they had a funeral pyre where they would just toss bodies in on it and have their body cremated. Of course, if anybody, I don't think there's many that are listening to this, remember that was the situation in the original original Around the World in 80 Days movie, which I don't know what year that was. My guess in the 50s, early 60s. But I would explain that when a body is cremated, that the end product of the cremation is basically the human skeleton. It's not ashes as people think they are. When you and it takes about 4 hours to cremate a body. But when you do see the product of cremation, you can recognize bone fragments. Um, they the longest part of the cremation process is the cooling off period because the chamber does get up to around 2,000 degrees. But they bring those bone fragments out, put them in a machine, which, for lack of a better word, pulverizes those into what we call ashes, or another word is cremains. So that sort of summarizes my professional contribution. I've also been, I can't even tell you how many times, to different organizations and talk about my life's work. A lot of the senior groups at the different churches. I almost forgot. There were a couple times I went to the college in Brockport and talked with a couple uh, death and dying classes there also. My civic involvement, um, I never was elected to anything, but I was a charter member of the Parma Hilton Historical Society, and have been a member ever since, and am currently on their board of directors. I was secretary of the Masonic Lodge, Clio Lodge, for 11 or 12 years, and then I was secretary a couple of years for Hilton, the Hilton Rotary Club. Um, I was the Parma town historian for a few years, but it got so that my professional uh, time just didn't permit me to give as much time as certainly Mr. David Crum is giving it at this time. Prior to both of us, there was Shirley Cox Houston, who was not only the Parma historian but the Monroe County historian for many years, and she wrote many books on the history of Parma and Hilton, which I'm sure they have copies at the library, or we do have them available for purchase at the Historical Society. In, I believe it was 2003, I was inducted into the Hilton Central High School Hall of Fame. Um, it was a great honor, um, and they still have that program. It's ongoing. I think it's every other year they accept nominees for that. Um, I've nominated several people, including one of them was David Crum that I mentioned, that was elected. Then another person that nobody would probably even think about there is a Franciscan monk from Hilton that is just celebrating his 50th anniversary as becoming a member of the monastery out in Peffard, New York. His name was James Almeter. He grew up on Parma Center Road, actually in the farm just west of the Parma Union Cemetery. He was also in my high school class, or my wife and my high school class, graduated in 1964. Getting back to the cemetery, in 1970 and 71, myself and Ann Blair took over the record keeping and the maintenance of the cemetery, and I oversaw the the mowing and weed eating, and actually at that time all of the graves were still dug by hand. Now we've had to resort to a backhoe, which most cemeteries use, but for many years that was still a mechanical procedure done by hand. um, Currently my sister and brother-in-law are in charge of the business aspects of the cemetery. That would be Lance and Chris Fuller, and Terry Lemke oversees the maintenance workers at the cemetery. So in 1970 and 71, I oversaw the transcription of all of the graves, all of the headstones, first of all at Parma Corners Cemetery, which is a relatively large cemetery just cross Route 104, Ridge Road, as you're going to Spencerport on your right, near, I don't mean to do advertising, near D'Angelo Plumbing and Heating. And by that, I oversaw every headstone being copied. Now, I didn't do it all. I mean, I recruited, and a lot of the people were from the Historical Society. Um, but in a lot of cases, you had to get right down on your hands and knees to actually read some of the inscriptions on the old marble stones that become extremely weathered. And the reason that was used a long time ago was that the stones were soft enough that they could be engraved upon. Uh, Now most of the headstones and monuments are of granite. Some are of bronze, but most of them are of granite. The biggest project was overseeing copying all the names in Parma Union Cemetery. And then I spent the next 2 or 3 years uh, typing all of the information on individual 3x5 cards, which again, that's all archaic now. Most of the work is you can get it all online. We do have a website for Parma Union Cemetery, but which I backed financially, but it got so expensive. So we haven't added many, basically since about 2005, those people have not been added to that website. Also, there was a time frame where David Roach, again another Hilton native, took pictures of all of the headstones that are in Parma Union Cemetery, with the exception of the newer sections that, well, we just have run out of time. Um, do you have any other questions of me, Mr. Hayes?
Well, kind of. You answered a lot of them. You're very good, very thorough. What's on the horizon for you and your business?
Well, I think I mentioned I am in the process of selling it to my longtime associate, Douglas Chalette. He's a native of Ogdensburg, but he came to work for me about 25 years ago
Mm-hmm.
and was with us for around 10 years. And then he needed to go back home to oversee the care of his elderly parents. And then a few years after that, he asked if he could come back with the understanding that perhaps we could work something out in the future where he could take over the business. So on our advertising now, it says Douglas Chalette, manager, Thomas Berger, founder. So and I'm there. They're supposed to, and most of the time they call me the next day when somebody that I know real well has passed away, so I can at least call up the family and extend my condolences. A little humor here is people used to say to me, well, they still do. They'll say, "Oh, Tom, I hope you're here when my turn comes." And as a return, I say, "Well, you never know. You might be here when they put my name in the paper." And about half of them will say, "Oh, we see your name in the paper almost every day." uh, so,
Um,
and the other thing is, people are always urging me to do it, is I could write a book that funerals are funny, because I've had many, many incidences where there's a humorous aspect to what I do. And in fact, I'd forgotten that I had said this, but Mr. Hayes's grandfather's funeral, you share the remark I
mhm.
made.
Well, it was at St. Leo's, and it was my grandfather, and we had the grandsons were rolling it out,
Paul
and
Bears,
pallbearers, thank you. And just before we exited, you said, "This is the last bump in the road,"
the door jam.
the door jam, and as soon just at that time, kaboop, and my grandfather's casket took a little bit of a bump, and it did provide. I mean, we were in our teens or whatever, but it did provide some humor at the time at just the right moment.
And I didn't always find it appropriate to make any remarks. Another one, I can't share a name, but another one that was very humorous is there was a gentleman that passed, and he had a special liking for Genesee beer. And his funeral happened to be in the old St. Paul Lutheran Church, where there were several steps where you would go up into where the actual sanctuary was. And the family had assembled, no, just the pallbearers had come down to the funeral home to get, and they were all grandsons, to get Grandpa ready to take up to church. And one of the boys comes in with a brown paper bag, as if I didn't know what was in the brown paper bag. So he sort of seemed shy about it. He says, "Come on now, we can take them out." And he took them out, and we put them all around Grandpa in the casket. But after I told him to do that, I'm thinking, oh my Lord, going up those steps at St. Paul Lutheran Church, I hope they don't roll around. Well, they didn't. We got to the cemetery, and um, the boys are carrying Grandpa to his grave, and all of a sudden, one of them did make a little change of position. And one of the boys says, "Come on, Gramps, can't you wait till we get you in the ground to your Papa Top?" So there's always a little chance to find something that's somewhat humorous.
Mm-hmm.
Just today I talked with actually a friend of my wife's that they're planning some social event, and um, she's had a lot of losses in her life, and she's 85. Not that that matters, but she is. And I was relaying how after some surgery I had recently, I don't feel that I've come back the way I thought I might. I'm doing fine, but I still thought it would be a miracle and I'd be perfect. But anyway, I said, and she's trying to encourage me, and I say, well, Dorothy, I said, you've had a lot of losses in your life, and I start to name them, and which she had many, and I thought I heard a little snuffling, and she says, "Oh, Tom, you're making me cry." I says, "That's okay." I said, "I say this all the time to people. You feel a lot better after you cry, and we all know you feel really good after you've laughed hard.
Mm-hmm.
So never, never be ashamed of shedding tears." And that's one of the other things. There's only so many ways to put it, and I say that to families all the time. Quite oftentimes, it's a lady that's lost her husband, and it's going to be a traditional funeral with a viewing, and I usually invite or encourage, well, just the immediate family to come into the room where the calling hours are going to be privately. And sometimes, if the circumstances, I might just invite the husband or wife to go with me. But a lot of times it's the wife. And of course, when she gets up to the casket, she starts to cry. And what does she do? Apologize to me, the funeral director, because she's crying. And my loss of words again, I'll tell him, "Now, come on, Jane, it's all right to cry." I said, "You're going to feel a lot better once that is behind you." And later on, though, she might tell me that I was right. And the same thing is when we lose people, there are certain days in the future after they've died that nobody else will remember except the immediate family members. One of them is, if it's a couple, their wedding anniversary, the person that died's birthday, the surviving spouse's birthday, um, their wedding day. Did I mention that? Anyway, those are all days that are difficult for the prime mourners. But what I say to them another time is somebody will say to me, "Oh, I'm dreading next Monday. That's the day that Jim died." And I will say, you're going to find when next Monday comes and goes that this anticipation you've got of this day that's hard to remember is worse than the actual day. And a lot of times it is. It's just, and it's not only death, but when we think of the anniversary of other unfortunate times in our lives, well, it's sometimes worse thinking about it coming up than when that
Mm-hmm.
day actually comes.
Um, you got a tough job. Like, how does Tom Berger handle the stress and the grief? And because there's a lot on your shoulders, and you've done over 7,000 families related. Like, what's been your support through it?
Well, there's been many times that I've had the funeral of people that I'm going to even say that I loved, not
Mm-hmm.
only my family members. I grew up in a very small neighborhood, this Hogan Point Road off of Hincher Road in Greece. And when I grew up, there were 5 houses there. Now, the Wegman family has built all these beautiful homes down there. But when I grew up, our 5 houses were like one big family. And one by one, some of those, well, all of those people have passed away since I lived there, and it was very difficult. Um, my parents, their funerals, I wanted to be a part of it, including where they passed away. One was at Unity or Park Ridge Hospital, another at Strong. Of course, we were with both parents when they passed, and I, of course, notified the funeral home when that had happened. And there was no way that I was just going to let my helpers come and get them to bring them back to the funeral home. I mean, either waited, I can't remember if I waited for them to come or went home and says, now don't you come up here until I'm able to come with you. Um, some people say, well, that's silly, or people say, well, why would you want to do that? I just feel that that was part of my professional
Mhm.
responsibility and my dedication to them. The most difficult are the young people, the
Mhm.
tragic deaths. There's there aren't any words to find that make it all better. One example there, and again, not naming names, um, was a situation. It was a young girl that had been killed, and we had an open casket funeral, and I had the family come in early, and of course there was a lot of very visible emotion, and the family's clergy men person wanted to be there when they came, which was fine. And we have the time where we go in, and I would never name the clergy person, and he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He began to try to console the family, especially the mother, with some scripture, and promised that where the girl was in a better, she didn't say better place, but anyway, he it really offended the mother, and I can still hear her scream at him and say, don't you take my grief away from me,
Mhm.
because she felt she needed to grieve, and she did.
Mhm.
But he didn't think he was doing anything wrong, but it certainly wasn't what this particular person needed at that time.
Mhm.
So, and then there's the infant deaths. Um, Hospitals have come a long way in helping families deal with those, especially the stillborns. And that was part of our training, and even times that I would lecture. I forgot how the times I lectured at obstetrical departments at, I think, at Rochester General and maybe Genesee at one time. But they used to not even let the mother see the deceased infant. The father maybe, but not the mother. It will upset you too much. Well, the opposite is true. They need not only to see, but they need to hold that child, unless there's some physical circumstances that would not make that a positive experience, which that has happened too. But the other thing is, um, in our training, I don't even like to own up to it, that we always used to talk about the baby case. It was a black box with hinges and latches on it. That's what you took to the hospital to remove or bring the infant home. I've never owned one. I've always taken just baby quilts and blankets, and we still go to the morgue area to retrieve the child, but I would never put a child in that case. Um, and one other incident along that line, though, we had a time when a little boy was about 3 that had a congenital problem, and he died at home, and quite suddenly. And I was called. I knew both the parents, not well, but by the time I got there with my help to bring the child from the home over to the funeral home, there had to be 40 people in that house.
Mhm.
Now, How is Tom Berger going to take this, and I'm going to say it, dead child out of the house with all these people glaring at me? Well, I thought and thought and thought about it. And finally, I passed it by one of the grandmothers who I knew better. And I said, this is going to be a very difficult time for me to take, I'm not going to say his real name, Arthur, from the house. But I said, what is your thought if I have the mom and dad dress him? It was in the winter, in his little snowsuit or whatever, and have them bring him over to the funeral home. Well, the grandmother I presented it to was very much in favor. The other grandmother says, "Am I crazy?"
Mm-hmm.
But um, uh, two against one out, and I would never just pop it on the parents. I called them to the side, and we talked about it. Now as I said, this child had lots of physical issues where they had been doing extra things for this child for the 3 years that he lived. They couldn't believe it, that I would even think of such a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they did. They've been dressing and undressing him all along. So they did. They put him in a snowsuit. The father, not my idea, even went out and warmed up the car before. And I did ask the other people in the house to sort of get out of the way. It was an upstairs. They came down, and then the car was in the garage. We went out through that entrance, and so they brought the child over, and then when we went in the funeral home, let's see who was carrying him. The father, and we sat out in my lobby, and I did so happen to have a rocking chair there that I've used under other similar circumstances. But we sat and we talked a little bit about what we were going to do for a funeral. But I said, "Now, Dad, why don't you give Mom your son for a few moments," which we did. Well, at that time, my preparation room, fancy room for embalming part of the funeral home, was on the first floor. That's not the case today. But when the time had come, I said, "I think it's time." I said, "Mom," called her by name, of course, "why don't you give child," called him by name, "to Dad?" And then I had him bring the child into and set him on the table where we would do that other procedure. I'll never forget. In fact, I think I've got it somewhere. The letter that I got from the grandmother that was against it. Because, of course, when the kids got home, they gave them a complete review. When I say the kids, they were probably late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
What they gave a complete review as to what we had done. And as I said, the letter that I got from the dissenting grandmother made it all worthwhile. Other times, I'll never forget, there was an infant it doesn't matter, but a child that died at home. Oh, and it was a blizzard. And the fellow that worked for me at that time and I went over. And it was all we could do to even stay on the roads to get there. But, they dressed the baby. I didn't have them come out to the car because the wind was blowing 40 miles an hour. But the next day, or maybe it was 2 days because it was a bad storm, when I met with them, I said, "Boy, how much did Scotty weigh?" I said, "Boy, my arms were tired when I got back to the funeral home." Now, why do you think I said that? Because I didn't want them to think I just tossed Scotty in the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
And I did hold him. I did. But that to me, I didn't get any feedback from it. But I just know that, they'd probably been wondering, where'd they put him? Where'd they do this and that? And I said that because that's what we did. Um, So I didn't mean for this to get into a depressing,
No.
uh, morbid presentation, but I'm really thankful to Fred Adams for what he did for our family back in November of 1960. And later in his life, he ended up living with his son and daughter in law, um, as in their home on Parma Center Road. And I used to stop by and to see Fred, and he knew what I felt about him. And usually the son and daughter in law would leave us alone in the family room and we'd talk. And we would share professional stories from, some of the tragic cases that we dealt with. We also would talk about the payment framework of different families. This is amongst ourselves, and we get some chuckles out of it. And yes, I was privileged to have his funeral. I think he was about 98 years old when he passed away. But as I say, I'm glad I had the chosen career that I have, and I'm also glad when I started this and decided to go to funeral directing school, I wanted to have a funeral home in my hometown where I really knew a lot of the people. Now, we all know Hilton and surrounding areas have really, really changed. And what's going to happen over the next 5 years? Basically, it's going to be um, more housing tracts will be expanding, and the rural way of life is going to be a thing of the past. Um, I talked with a fella over in Rocky Ellsworth that had cows. I said to him when I saw him not long ago, I said, "Are there any dairy farms left in Hammond?" Well, I knew there wasn't because I had that discussion with others. There aren't. I mean, um, the big farms that existed are just no more. A lot of them have become cash crops, but it's still um, it's still a whole different ball game. And a lot of the farmers, they've either bought up or are renting. Some of them are farming 1,500 to 2,500 acres. So from that aspect, um, um, it's not a rural community anymore. Um, and hopefully we can attract some more businesses. I know there's lots of controversy that develops when any new business wants to come to town. There's always the pros and con people that don't go along with it, or else they're really encouraging it. So, um, Hilton has been a great place for me to spend my life. I'll be 78 in a couple weeks. I hope I've got a few more years. But I think it's a great place to grow up your kids, and I'm really impressed with the way our greater Hilton community stands behind the sports, the music and sports programs that the school has. And I always need to add that I was a member of the first marching band, which was started, let's see, in 1963 when a Mr. Bud Lucy came to Hilton from, let's see, I think he was from Wyoming, New York. And I'll never forget the first year we had like little sailor suit outfits that we wore. We went to the state fair. There used to be a big band um, competition there. And I think we came in second place. Then the next year, with fundraising from the music boosters and things, we did get real uniforms, and I know we came in first in the state in the marching band competition. And yes, I was in the Cornell Big Red marching band for 2 years when I went there. I was uh, tone deaf. I had to be a percussionist because I can't tell C from D. So thank you very much.
Well, I got a couple more
Oh, a
questions if you
couple
don't
more
mind. Yes.
questions.
If you could have dinner with anyone in
Oh,
history,
Lord
who
have
would it be?
mercy.
And then I have one more after that.
Okay. Who would I have dinner with? That's sort of hard, but not really. Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
Would be Abraham Lincoln. There's an example of a person that progressed through life from being poverty stricken to President of the United States. And it wasn't an easy role. Those of you that have followed the life of Lincoln through the history books, I know what way back though. I don't know. I think it was junior high, maybe senior. Um, I think there were 4 volumes of it. One of the first introductions I had to Abraham Lincoln, other than through Blanche March in 8th grade, was Carl Sandburg
Mm-hmm.
wrote 4 volumes on the life of Lincoln. And I remember reading all of those. But Abe Lincoln would be the one I'd want to have dinner with.
And my last one, my grandmother, her 2 kids and her husband passed away before she did, and she always said, "I wish it was me that passed away before." And how do you deal with people that don't have some sense of faith of the afterlife, that there's more than just what's on this earth?
Well, I have to be very careful with that.
Okay.
Without giving too much personal history here, but I'm not ashamed of it, certainly. I grew up in the Hilton Baptist Church. When I talked to you about teaching school in Buffalo, the schools that I taught in were strictly inner city. And when the bell rang at 3:30, their chains were put around the doors to lock the doors in the school. As a result, we as members of the teacher corps would look for other places to do after school activities with the kids. And one of them was at St. Mary's Church in downtown Buffalo. And I got the priest there at that time was so accommodating and letting us use the facility, which, remember I said inner city Buffalo, all of the founding members of that church had all moved to the suburbs. So anyway, just one thing would lead to another, and I just had a calling to convert to Catholicism. And so that's just a little bit of my faith history background. But no, oh dear, probably, and I'm not talking about I've said all these positive things about the community, but at least 45 to 50 or maybe even 60% of the families that we're called upon to help at this worst time in your life cannot give us a church connection. We have a list of clergy people that we call to help out, and other times, and I'm not trying to turn my collar around, but people say, "Well, Tom, you knew Dad better than any minister would. Will you say a few words?" And I don't want to, as I said, I don't want people to think I'm trying to become a clergy person too, even though I did get I forgot about this. Way back, I went to a 2-week course on becoming a civil celebrant. And, what that dealt with is conducting funerals from not necessarily a religious aspect, but from celebration of life of the person. And my associate Doug, we do the same thing periodically. But if we try to get a clergy person to come in at that time, if the family's agreeable to that. But it is sad that and a lot of the mainstream churches are having a hard time surviving. Just like I referred to the fraternal organizations, fire department. If you look, they're always trying to recruit younger members to become firemen. But now the state has so many requirements to be able to be certified, even as a volunteer fireman. That's what's happened in the ambulance corps. You not only have you have to be an EMD on board and all of those things that communities can't necessarily provide. Bus drivers. Every school district is looking for bus drivers. There was something on the news, I think a couple nights ago, where they're even going to increase the distance that kids are going to have to walk to school from like a half a mile to a mile, because they just can't get enough bus drivers to man the buses. So, hate to end in a not positive note, but it's a fact of our life.
Well, Tom, it's been great getting to know you on a much more personal basis. And I hope I don't have to see you anytime soon. But if I do, I know my family's in good hands.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
folks, it's been thoughtful talk with Tommy. Thank you for joining us. And we'll be back with more episodes real soon.
The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find